From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
EPA rescinds cyber regulations for the water sector. Zero-day attacks affect over 10,000 Cisco devices, and Signal debunks zero-day reports. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, definitely some opinion, and most certainly some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Andrew Wilder, the CSO at Community Veterinary Partners. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks, Rich. I appreciate your having me and looking forward to talking about some of these hard-hitting headlines today.
Yeah, lots of really interesting stuff. Definitely want to get your take on them. Before we dive into the news, though, have to thank our sponsor for today, Vanta, compliance that doesn't suck too much. Join us on YouTube Live. Remember to go to CISOseries.com to do so. Hit the events drop down and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. Once you've done that, you can also just subscribe to the CISO Series YouTube channel and you'll get notifications when we go live. Remember, if you're in that live chat, get us some comments. We love to see what you guys are talking about. Get your feedback on these stories. That makes the show richer. It makes us better and gives us more perspectives to consider. So make sure you are doing that. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump into it. First one here, one that raised some eyebrows, I think. EPA rescinds cyber regulations for the water sector. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has sent a letter to state drinking water authorities that'll be withdrawing its requirements to conduct cybersecurity audits of water utilities. According to Cyberscoop, this is due to litigation from Republican states and trade associations that have raised questions about the long-term legal viability of the initiative to regulate the cybersecurity of water utilities. So both the EPA and water associations behind the litigation have pledged to uphold cybersecurity in this area of infrastructure, though this is clearly a blow to the Biden's administration of continuing efforts to increase cybersecurity, especially across, vital infrastructure. I'm curious, Andrew, what's your take on this?
So this is definitely a blow to the Biden administration's efforts to uphold cybersecurity. If you think about it, like imagine that your local school board said, we really want to take education seriously, but we're going to get rid of all the testing, right? It's just the message that they gave after this is just so ridiculous. I mean, if you're really planning to uphold cyber in this area, why are you rescinding the requirement? It doesn't make any sense. And then the other thing that made me think about is, what about Colonial Pipeline? Like, we were all up in arms about that and all the news about that and protecting critical infrastructure, and now we're not going to hold them accountable. I don't understand why states or trade associations would support this in any way. I think we should be going the opposite way. If you look at critical infrastructure, it's currently being nailed with state-backed attacks, with ransomware or things like that. And I think the consequences to public safety is huge. I mean, imagine that your local water system gets a cyber attack and is down and they can't do refinements. We've seen this happen in the news for natural disasters as well. So just think about not having safe drinking water in your community. I would say shame on the EPA for doing this and for listening to those the people telling them to shut it down.
Yeah, that this could seemingly be politicized among the one of the few things that I feel like we had something even vaguely approaching bipartisan support of does not spell well that I don't know if this is not wanting to give a win or something like that, but and especially with no replacement other than we'll keep trying.
Yeah, we're really supporting it.
Yeah, like 2 stars, like that's great. I completely understand the idea of, like, listen, if you set out requirements, compliance requirements, sure, maybe those become checkbox, but at least that's a base level that you're giving across this wide sector here. I hope we have some more follow-ups that point a path forward that's more constructive than this, but definitely raise some eyebrows this week.
I would say, from a cybersecurity leadership perspective, if you're not comfortable with having someone come in and take a look at what you're doing, then you're probably not doing things right. So rescinding a program where you're going to have some oversight into what people are doing is saying, we know we're not doing things right and we're kind of backing away from it. But it's, we've said all there is to say there. It's they're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, keep tuned to cybersecurity headlines. If we have any more updates on that, we will be sure to let you know. Next up here, another one that raised some eyebrows this week. Zero-day attacks affect over 10,000 Cisco devices. Researchers at VulnCheck discovered attackers exploiting a recently disclosed critical zero-day bug impacting at least 10,000 Cisco iOS XE devices, including enterprise switches, routers, access points, and wireless controllers. Pretty much the whole kit and caboodle. This is a maximum severity vulnerability that could allow attackers to monitor network traffic, pivot to protected networks, and perform man-in-the-middle attacks. An updated story from CSO Online, dated today, points out that a fourth of all impacted devices are in the US, and that according to a census blog post, while the initial surge of compromises appears to have been diminished, we're now grappling with a substantial number of compromised routers. Andrew, just lay it out for us. How big of a problem is this for admins, and how can they be sure, of a complete correction of this problem?
So if you had asked me earlier in the week, it would be a little bit more of an unknown. But based on the update today, we're seeing this being actively exploited. Cisco has not released an update for this yet, so they do have some fixes, and we can talk about that in a minute of what you're going to do. For administrators, I think it really depends on where you're at, right? So it depends on what type of asset inventory you have in place. Do you have a really good asset inventory to know where all your routers and switches and access points and all that stuff are? And then once you have that, do you know how well updated those things are? So that's the key here, is that you need to go and see what's out there. Now, updating right now is not going to do anything. So now you got to just see where you're at and make sure that you're going to be able to patch once they release the patch. I think the things that they talked about in terms of IOCs is that the exploit is creating some local user accounts that appear to be Cisco accounts. Mm-hmm. What they've told you to do is to disable the web interface and then remove the management interfaces from the internet right now. And that might be your question of how hard is that to do? Again, that goes back to, do you know where all those devices are? Do you know where all those web interfaces are, and can you shut those down without having those big kinds of impact? I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it is very much a cut the hard line feel to a lot of these devices. Like, don't let anybody touch these until we have the full patches in place. So speaking to the severity, for sure. So as that rolls out, again, we'll keep you updated. Next up here, one that I think this is one that was closest to my heart this week. Signal debunks zero-day reports. Recent posts on Mastodon and LinkedIn claim that a zero-day exploit on the encrypted messaging app could allow for access to a targeted mobile device. The problem is, in response on X, Signal said, "We have no evidence that suggests this vulnerability is real." Signal is famous for its fierce reluctance in any way to weaken its encryption or subscriber privacy. But I guess, as Carl Sagan once said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I guess with that response from Signal, Andrew, is that a more maybe a calculated move, or does I don't know, does your spidey sense, I guess, go up hearing that, just these reports and that kind of flat denial?
Well, I like that you're asking about my spidey sense, Rich. That's an important part of the question. So, the way I think about these things is, let's think of it from a perspective of, you are Signal, mm-hmm. right? And someone comes out publicly and says, "Oh, you have a zero-day attack." Well, if you don't know anything about it and it hasn't been reported through your reporting channels, then the first thing I'm going to say is, we don't have any evidence of this. We don't know anything about this. Now, maybe on the back there, they're going and investigating and seeing if they have something, so they may come out with something else publicly. But when this came out over the weekend, I am in a bunch of these CISO Slack groups and stuff, everybody's saying, "Hey, is this legitimate? Is this really happening? What are we doing here?" Obviously, in the cyber community, we're fans of Signal. A lot of people are using it. There's a lot of Signal groups and stuff. The other thing it reminded me of is, there was another article this week about D-Link being hacked. Now, D-Link went and spent a bunch of money on forensics teams to come in and validate this thing of them being hacked, and then ended up saying, like, "Oh, we weren't actually hacked." So is this going to be something where people are using this to do corporate espionage with people or whatever, to like say, "Oh, well, this company was hacked, company XYZ was hacked," and then they've got to go out and prove that they weren't hacked and spend a bunch of money. So it was an interesting thing from Signal. I understand why they did that. We'll see if it comes out that something really did happen or not, but it also could be an interesting way to do it.
David Cross in our chat had an interesting question, and we saw this also. There was the ransomware group Ransom VC kind of come out with some leak claims that it seemed like they weren't hurling water on that. But David Cross had asked, are we going to see more fake news about potential exploits and breaches to draw attention to or away from various companies? What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree, David. I think we might see this as a tactic going forward. And it's an interesting thing because in the original question, that Carl Sagan quote, right, is like, do you really know? And we've got this new SEC thing where people are going to have to report everything, and how is that going to impact it or not? So, it certainly is something that could be done. And if you want to kind of nail your competitor, what better way to publish something or get someone else to publish something to say, hey, my competitor has been hacked in a cyber breach, and then they're going to have to go and spend money and use resources to prove that they weren't.
Yeah, I wonder if this will become the equivalent of like, rent a DDoS on the day your competitor is going to be launching a product or something like that, right? Hey, just put it up on your leak site for a day, get them in a bad news cycle or something like that. How that will go. So, new avenues of of making security people's lives miserable. Who knew threat actors could be so horrible?
It made me think about the swatting thing.
Yeah.
Right. Is this the new swatting?
Yes. Yeah. At least less life-threatening, which is, I guess, a bonus. Our next story here: ServiceNow data exposure issue identified. Security researcher Aaron Costello released a report identifying a data exposure issue with the popular digital business service platform ServiceNow. Costello estimates roughly 70% of instances contain a misconfiguration in a component with the platform's Simple List feature. The issue could expose information in Simple List tables. That can include pretty much anything, but names, emails, internal documents, probably the things people are most concerned about. Issue isn't new. Apparently, it's been in Simple List since it launched in 2015. So Andrew, another researcher looking into the exposure, saw no signs of threat actors exploiting it in the wild yet. And ServiceNow has pointed clients to what it describes as official guidance, allowing them to evaluate whether additional steps are needed to further secure their instances. I'm curious, though, does this issue seem to be a sleeping dragon to you?
I think this definitely could be a sleeping dragon. You talked about that it's been around since the creation of 2015. And any data vulnerability that's been out there for years, I would classify as probably a sleeping dragon. If you look at ServiceNow's kind of market share, like 35,000 companies are using ServiceNow today, and that includes about 85% of the Fortune 500. So it's got some pretty deep hooks into some of the biggest companies that we have. To me, it reminds me of the importance of looking at your software bill of materials. This is something that CISA released earlier this year, and making sure all your code is secure and all the code that you get from other areas. I don't know where Simple List came from. I guess it's something that they created. The good thing about this today is we're not seeing any evidence of exploitation in the wild. But now that this report has been published and people are aware that this is out there, you may start to see some exploitation. I did look at the fix that was recommended by ServiceNow, and it was three things. So one was to do IP filtering for inbound traffic. I'm a fan of the U.S. Department of Treasury's sanction list for IP filtering. I think that's a great way to do it. Disabling your public widgets in ServiceNow. I'm not a ServiceNow expert, so I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I can kind of figure it out. And the last one was to beef up your access control list. So some of those are kind of standard things that you'd want to be doing anyway, but good luck to all of you ServiceNow customers out there.
Yes, beef the ackles before it is too late. Before we move on to our next story, we have to spend a minute and thank our sponsor for today, Vanta. Growing a business, that likely means more tools, third-party vendors, and data sharing, aka way more risk. Vanta's market-leading trust management platform brings GRC and security efforts together. Integrate information from multiple systems and reduce risk to your business and your brand, all without the need for additional staffing. And by automating up to 90% of the work for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, you'll be able to focus on strategy and security, not maintaining compliance. Join 5,000 fast-growing companies that leverage Vanta to manage risk, improve security, in real time. Our listeners get $1,000 off Vanta. Go to vanta.com/CISO to claim this discount. That's VANTA.com/CISO. State-backed attackers exploit WinRAR zero-day. Security researchers at Google found evidence that state-sponsored threat actors linked to China and Russia began exploiting a vulnerability in the Windows archive utility WinRAR. Group IB previously discovered this vulnerability and found signs of exploitation since at least April. Although its developer issued a patch on August 2nd, Google researchers say many users have not yet applied the update, opening the door to attacks from these APTs. This includes some giant names that are kind of regulars on the cybersecurity headlines: Sandworm and Fancy Bear. So, Andrew, aside from threat actor names still being ridiculous, this constant act of administrators not patching urgent vulnerabilities, just like kind of what we may be seeing with the Cisco item as time goes on, makes admins potentially look bad or negligent. I'm curious though, is it fair to blame them, or does this become more of an organizational problem or just individual users?
Well, in my humble opinion, it's definitely not fair to blame them. Vulnerability management is a problem for everyone everywhere. One of the big questions is, if you have in your environment millions of vulnerabilities, how do you effectively prioritize that? Do you use a data-driven defense model? So you look at, all the attacks that have happened to you before. Do you rely on threat intel exclusively? Do you do the crown jewels method, where you just try and protect those systems that have your most important data? Do you look at things that are actively being exploited in the wild, like this one is? Do you look at the changes that will give you the biggest bang for the buck and give you the biggest reduction of exploits? It goes back to the thing that CISO is proposing this year about holding vendors accountable for failures in SBOMs. So how you're going to do this is going to be a challenge. To hold vendors accountable, because your business is going to say to you, "Hey, we've got WinRAR in our environment. Go out and patch it. I don't want to be vulnerable to this." So,
Yeah, it's easy when we see, when we hear from Google to say, "Oh, well, the solution's out there. It's just people aren't applying it," and it's that context of like, yes, like like you can't, if you're patching all the critical CVs, you're missing things that actually represent risk to, meaningful risk to your business. So I always feel like that context, especially among a wider populace, where it seems like just on its face, you're like, it's just click the button, patch all the things. How hard is that? I always appreciate that context of being like, you have no idea the scale of patching and triage that needs to happen to actually make this like a risk reduction strategy. So I truly appreciate that. All right, and our last story of the day: over 40,000 admin portal accounts use admin as a password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Admin, password. You guessed it. These are still the passwords that can get you into at least 40,000 portals. That comes from research from the cybersecurity company Outpost 24. The number came from an analysis of more than 1.8 million administrator credentials between January and September this year, and came from information stealing malware. Outpost 24 stated that although collected data was not in plain text, most of the passwords in our list could have been easily guessed in a rather unsophisticated password guessing attack. It's not even like, I don't even consider that brute force. That's like
well,
any level of effort will immediately crack these. Andrew, every week it seems there's a story that I guess makes me look over my metaphorical glasses in a school marmish kind of way, and this is certainly one of them. I'm curious, what do we make when we see stories like this?
so what it reminded me when I was reading through it is that this is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. This is where we as cyber professionals try and help everybody else who may not be cyber savvy to get them up to speed. And usually the three big messages that we give them are, be safe with your passwords. Probably use a password manager if you can. Don't have the same password for everything. Change the default passwords on all your devices. So don't have admin, and keep, as we talked about with WinRAR, keep your devices and your software up to date. So this is cybersecurity basics. This is what I would call an auditor's dream come true.
you know, when I see things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I hope no one is shipping that password, but in so much increasingly, understand a lot of security to be like design challenges. And like it's a failure of design to ship anything, whether it's hardware or a service or something like that, that allows you to proceed with admin or admin backwards or root backwards as your password. Like that to me it was a design decision that is setting users up to fail, especially when we're talking like I'm always sympathetic to, SMBs or something like that, where it's one man IT a lot of times at best, let alone security. So like, yeah, like as I understand security to be a design practice in many ways, that's kind of the where I see that story coming from.
Yeah, don't allow the problem to happen in the first place, and don't think that people are going to be smart enough every time to change the defaults.
Yeah. It's yeah, don't blame the users. You shipped it.
Exactly.
All right. Before we get out of here, Andrew, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you?
Well, I have to say that last one was quite a doozy, but I think the one that really shook me the most this week was the first story that we talked about, the EPA. The statement of saying we really want to take cybersecurity seriously, but we're going to rescind all the things that we were going to do. It just seems to be going backwards when we're trying to move this thing forward. So that was the biggest one for me.
All right. And thank you also to all of our commenters today. We had David Cross, CCL, Scott Tabibi, some others in the chat getting involved there, watching us live. It means a lot to get your comments, to get your perspectives and the questions that you have about these stories. So if you're watching this on the replay or listening to this in your podcast feed, be sure to try and join us every single Friday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. We love to have your comments. And we also love to have Andrew Wilder, the CSO at Community Veterinary Partners, on the show. Andrew, thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks, Rich. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all the listeners. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks also to our sponsor for today, Vanta, compliance that doesn't suck too much. Also, thanks to everybody, like I said, joining us in the live stream and those that will join us in the future. Remember, you can join us next Friday for Super Cyber Friday, where our topic will be hacking third-party risk in the cloud, an hour of critical thinking about the underappreciated risks introduced by your sanctioned and unsanctioned SaaS apps. That starts at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. At the end of the hour, we'll switch gears to a meetup where everyone will get a chance to meet face-to-face. You can talk to everybody. If you had any questions during the show that didn't get answered, check it out. It's a really fun time. And of course, we'll be back with the week in review. In the meantime, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, you have 6 minutes. You will be all caught up on the news. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.